We prepare to come to this cruise, and as we prepare through life for our weddings, for our babies being born.
Yes.
And my big question is, how come we don't prepare for the big event of our transition? Why we have the tendency or longevity?
Because you misunderstand what it is. You think it's the ending of something instead of the continuation.
Oh, yes, I understand that it's a continuation into a new dimension. And anyway, I'm saying all this because I'll be embarking.
Well, most people don't prepare for their physical death. That word doesn't apply, but might as well use it. Most people don't prepare for it because they don't want it.
Nobody wants to die, correct?
Because they misunderstand it.
And that's a cultural thing? Is that worldwide you believe?
Not everyone feels that way, but it is the big trend. Feels like an ending. It feels unfamiliar. There are so many unknowns. Most people don't let go until their body's so broken they can't stand it. That is the reason that there is so much illness, is because it's the excuse that people use to make their transition when they're no longer having fun, in many cases, not in all. In other words, a lot of people make their transition because they're happy that they've lived life and they've been in sync with their inner being, and they can feel their inner being calling them into a new profession, into a new perspective, into a new opportunity to be part of the expansion. In other words, it's not always that way. Oh, let's make it very simple and clear. There are people who make their transition from the upper half of the emotional scale, and there are people who make their transition from the lower half of the emotional scale. Most humans make it from the lower half of the scale, and almost all animals make it from the upper half. Even those that you're eating for lunch. They made their transition from the upper half of the emotional scale because they don't see themselves as one-trick ponies.
The main reason I wanted to talk to you is because I'll be embarking in around 3 years research on how to have a peaceful death. That's my intention. And I just did some research about a group of people that are called end-of-life doulas.
The thing that's interesting about that, peaceful, Esther had a friend some years ago, she hasn't seen her in a long time, who often said, "You can rest in heaven, honey," when someone was working too hard or overwhelmed. And by then Esther had met us, and she would think, I don't think that's how it is. I don't think that anybody in the non-physical is what you would call resting. They're all eager and focused and thrilled and still part of this and looking forward. And so if we were standing in your physical shoes, we would use the word joyful instead of peaceful. Peaceful sounds like winding it down, and your transition into non-physical is revving it up. Jerry had an experience many years ago before he met us, but he told the story to Esther many times, and he told the story to us and asked about it. He was with a family, and they were going up a mountain, and the father of this family was driving the pickup truck, and his children were in the back of the pickup truck with no seats. They were on sleeping bags. And Jerry was riding back there with them. It was quite a long ride, and Jerry was tutoring these kids in Spanish. Jerry spoke Spanish fluently, and they were studying for some school exam. And so they had a flashlight, and that's what they were doing in the back of the truck. And the man had said, "My brakes aren't working well, but it's not a problem because I can just use my gears to slow the truck down when I need to." And so now they've reached the peak of the mountain, and now they're going down the other side, and Jerry's listening, and he can hear that this man is struggling to get the truck into a lower gear, and it's moving too fast. He can't get it into the lower gear. Jerry can hear the gears grinding, and he knows that they're traveling too fast. He's not slowing it down with the gears, and Jerry can feel that the truck is out of control, and they're on a winding mountain pass. And so Jerry says to the kids, "Okay, kiddos, this is it." really thinking that they were all about to make their transition into non-physical. Everything in his physical awareness said, we're not going to make it out of this. But this father was clear-minded, and he managed to turn the truck up against the mountain instead of going off the ledge. And in doing so, the truck flipped over on its top. Now, they were in the back of a pickup truck with a canvas top, so they had no protection. And Jerry said he remembers his knees hitting the pavement through the canvas. And then he remembers the truck falling on him, and he lost consciousness. And then he regained consciousness. And then he began to say to people, I'm no longer afraid of death because I know what it's like. You're just tutoring somebody in Spanish 1 minute, and the next minute, lights are out, unconscious. And when he told us that story, we said, that's nothing like the death experience. That's unconscious. The death experience is super consciousness. You don't become nothing, you become everything. You become clarity and love and certainty and eagerness. And then you focus with your physical friends again about what they are doing, and you become part of the eternal motion forward that is taking place here out on the leading edge, you see.
I understand that.
Yeah.
I understand it.
So
it's just getting to that point, to that transition, getting to that preparation for that, the end of life.
Well, if you want no glitch or no lull between the transition into super consciousness, doesn't it seem more like you'd like to be super involved in super life on your way to more super life rather than tired or even peaceful? We're not trying to talk you out of peaceful. We just know a whole lot of emotions that feel way better than
I'm
peaceful.
changing that to joyful now. So that's
You're easy.
So my concentration is going to be for the elderly, which a lot of them have dementia at this stage, but also for the terminal ill person. I will exclude everyone that is committing suicide or has a sudden death. I'm looking into...
Why would you exclude suicide? Every death is suicide.
Because there is nobody I can interview that had any knowledge of the suicide.
So they're not asking for information before they do that?
That's going to be a challenging situation for me to...
Yeah.
Right now, I'm hoping to interview a lot of people that work in hospice in order to be able to reach to those that are preparing for the transition.
Well, the thing that we want to ask you is, we're going to say this to you softly, and we're not trying to change your direction at all. We just want to give you some insight that might cause you to ask some different questions, which will give you a whole lot more satisfying experience in this process. Could you imagine needing a book that explains gravity? Chapter 1. If you drop it, it will fall down. End of book. In other words, not anything to study or know about it, because life's just showing it to you. So what we're saying in the same way is that this death experience is so guided by non-physical, and it's always exactly right. And you know what? Hear this. This is the most important part for you. It has far more to do with those standing around while they're making their departure than it does with the one making their departure.
Exactly.
There was a woman, Jerry and Esther knew her well. She has now made her transition into non-physical. But she used to call, back in the day when Esther was still doing telephone consultations. We were doing them. Esther was scheduling them. And Audrey would call twice. She would book 2 appointments back to back with a 15-minute break between them. And she was a psychiatrist, a psychologist, a counselor. She had so many initials behind her name, and a very thriving practice of people who were benefiting by her wisdom. And she'd integrated so much of what we were teaching into it. And so she was helping a lot of people in a lot of ways. And sometimes she would have someone who was particularly difficult to help, and she would talk to us about them. And often it was about her own experience. And her father had been on the brink of making his transition for a long time. and he was not making this transition. He was not feeling good. He had not been conscious for quite a while. The hospital's expenses were enormous, and the family was distraught, and he was not making his transition, and he was not making his transition. And she said to us, "What's going wrong?" And we said, "Nothing is wrong. It's all perfectly on schedule. There's nothing about it that is not exactly perfect." And in that moment, he made his transition. In that moment. Because in that moment, she released the tension. She released her feeling of responsibility, that there was more to say or something else to do or something to explain. And then we talked a lot with her and with others about how often it is that someone will be in that process of making their transition, and they wait until everyone has left the room, and then off they go. Because it's the path of least resistance. There's not something else. So often you think that they are unconscious. They are not unconscious. They are in that super consciousness state, timing it just right, you see. So if we were counseling as you are intending to, that's the basis of what we would teach. It's always just right, no matter how it looks to you. And it's always what's best. And your dearly not so departed and never going to be so departed is factoring in from that non-physical. It's a little tricky because lots of people are looking at that in lots of different ways. And you know what? As you do research, you're going to get lots of different information based upon lots of different points of attraction. You're not ever going to be able to come up with a formula that applies to everyone. So if we were writing the book, we would encourage it to be something like, every death is individually perfect. Every person is syncing up in the now, not predetermined, not predecided, not keeping some promise to anything. In the now, factoring everything in and doing it exactly right every time, no exceptions.
I'm not writing a book. I'm trying to get my PhD.
Well, you're writing something.
Yeah, I'm going to write something for my...
You're writing something. And what are PhDs about anyway? Are they coming to a conclusion? Is it a theory that you have decided that you are then wanting to support with the interviews that you are doing?
There is really not much research out there for death and dying.
Yeah, nobody wants to talk about it. Nobody understands it. And it's so varied.
Exactly. I understand the challenges I have ahead of me. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to come to this cruise, to see if I could talk to you and find out, yes, there is many variables that are going to be involved in my research in regards to who am I going to be interviewing.
Here's the thing about research, and this is the first thing that we would write in our paper or our book or anything that we are ever presenting to the world. This is the first statement that we would write. I am keenly aware that the decisions that I've made about this are controlling the information that I'm gathering. So what I'm presenting to you here is what I think. In other words, isn't it always that way? Doesn't the law of attraction make that so? It's really interesting to watch scientific things play out. People who gather statistics always have a premise or a theory. And then the statistics that they gather support it because the law of attraction says it must. And then humans are running around trying to decide what's true and what's not true, or which truth is truthier. So what's your big reason for doing this?
In a way, it's kind of selfish. I got a plan for my own death. And it's going to give a peace of mind to those accompanying the person that is transitioning.
The easiest way for you to get to what you're looking for is to find a handful, 10 or 20, long-time hospice people who have witnessed a lot of deaths, and just listen to them. And they will tell you a unified story, very much like the one we just told you.
Thank you. I did interview Anna. The first person that came in the first workshop, and we talked for about 3 hours already. I think I'm going the right direction.
That's where you're going to get what you're looking for.
Thank you very much.
Unless you're willing to interview non-physical, and they'll tell you an entirely different story.